guys, we're gonna try this one more time. So
Recording.
I am recording.
Yeah, you are. That's right.
I am recording. Oh, I gotta restart my timer. Darn it. So pause, cancel, start. All right, 13 minutes. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I was going to look at Asia, but Asia is far too broad, and we have the 1 day left, so I wanted to try and focus a little bit more in on a more succinct area, which is traditional Japanese architecture, which is essentially a subset of Chinese architecture that developed down its own pathway. So one of the things that my cursor's not working. There it goes. One of the things I want to kind of look back on is our Dymaxion map and the location of Japan, particularly in relation to where all of the other early cultures were that we sort of studied. So I want you guys to kind of notice that we looked at cultures here in Mesopotamia. We looked at cultures sort of in the Greek area, in Egypt. We looked at Rome and its expansion to most of this region right in here across the Mediterranean. So if I go over here with my cursor, you should be able to sort of see that. So, you know, Rome sort of covered this entire area, but we looked at a variety of different sort of cultures that existed here. If you remember early on, the very first lecture I think I gave you regarding the continents and where people settled, there were four kind of initial regions that developed cultures, right? This might be on your final examination. Right? So did anybody remember the distinguishing feature of those specific areas?
Yes.
What was it?
I wrote them down.
They were river valleys, right? And so there was the Indus River Valley, sort of up between India and the Middle East. There was the Yellow River over in China. There was the Tigris and the Euphrates, and then finally there was the Nile. Anyway, so that was just kind of a link back to what we were talking about. You can see that all of these cultures and the early development of these cultures are all linked by a landmass. Okay, so you can get from the Far East to the Middle East or the Near East, and then to Europe without ever having to cross an ocean. You literally could walk there if you wanted to. As a matter of fact, we know that Marco Polo visited the East, and Alexander the Great also visited the East. So we know that people could literally walk across the Asian continent and sort of bring together all of these various influences and start to kind of create this sort of melting pot of cultures. Okay? So just kind of try to picture that. I've got a couple of additional images that link it back to what we had previously studied. So here you see, you know, some of the original areas: the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the Gulf of, or the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea. Okay, and then if you start to look across, you see the tip of India, right? So as we rotate the globe around, there's the tip of India. Here are all of the areas for the first cultures that we studied, the Western cultures, and here is Japan on the other side of the Asian continent. Many of you have probably heard of Western versus Eastern culture, right? Probably, if you were like me, you probably didn't exactly know what the hell that meant. For starters, east of where, right? Because the east is west of here, across the Pacific Ocean. So, but what it really referred to, right, was the relationship of Europe to Asia, which is why this is called the Middle East, and this is called the Far East. Okay? All right, aerial view of Japan. Japan is a large set of islands off the coast. I'll back it up for a second. Oops. So it's a large set of islands off of the coast of mostly China and Korea, right? The Korean Peninsula sticks out right there. So let's talk about a contrast between Western culture and Eastern culture. Okay? Most of you, not all of you, but most of you, sort of grew up in Western culture. Until fairly recent times, the idea that man should go forth and conquer the earth and use it for their purposes was a common trait, right? You guys have probably heard of that. Have you? Or is it a completely foreign thought?
No.
You've heard that. I mean, it's literally part of Judeo-Christian thought. I'm not real clear on Islam. I'm going to guess that since Islam came from the same foundations as Judaism, that it's part of that thought also. Okay, but Eastern thought is very different. Eastern thought places man as an element in the environment, not this standalone element in contrast to the environment. So I put these two images up just because it draws a contrast in art, right? We have the statue of David, which sort of stands as this perfect individual, okay? And the focus is on the individual. And we have this woodblock painting from a historic Japanese collection, and it's showing an environment and a temple placed into the environment. The temple is part of the environment. It doesn't dominate the environment. It's kind of shrouded inside of the environment. Okay? And so that's one of those things that you guys got to kind of, if you're going to try to understand Eastern culture and Japanese architecture or Chinese architecture, you got to kind of get that framework in your sort of nugget. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at some of the influences on Japanese architecture. We'll look at 4 general areas, all right, that we sort of threw up there. One of them is geography and climate, so position, okay? And in relation to position on Earth, the climates that are related to it. The second one is philosophy and religion. That's going to have a profound impact, and it's going to have one of the major impacts on that thought of man as being one little part of a larger whole of nature rather than man in sort of control of nature or trying to dominate nature. Okay? Social structure, and finally influences from other cultures. So one of the things, again, is to look at Japan to try to tie it back to us. Okay? We learn and we understand things through our framework, right? How many of you guys know that we have a state called Washington State? Not Washington, D.C., Washington State. Washington, D.C. is and has been for decades Lululand, okay? So we have Washington State. Is Washington State like freaking hotter than hell? It's kind of cool, huh? Kind of cold, right? Seattle's up there. What? They got 2 kinds of weather in Seattle? Misty, cloudy, and rainy, and put a gun in your mouth kind of rainy. Something like that. I've heard that somewhere. Okay? So it's like really depressing up there. It's cold and clammy, right? And then we've got Southern California, and maybe even if we start to think a little bit more about, what's south of Southern California? The Baja Peninsula, right? Baja Peninsula, northern Baja is kind of cool, middle Baja is very temperate, southern Baja is very hot. Hot, I mean freaking hot. All right, well, if you look at Japan and you look at the United States and portions of Baja, you're going to find that it occupies approximately the same latitude as Washington to, let's call it maybe Loreto, Mulegé, Bay of Conception down in Baja California. So straight across. So you can think of northern Japan as having this cool, misty climate, It's not the only thing that influences climate. So latitude is not the only thing that influences climate. Understand that there are some major deserts that exist right around in this area. You guys know about that. We studied that as part of the earlier lectures. But latitude does have a profound impact on climate. So northern Japan is very cool. Southern Japan is more subtropical. Okay? And then everything in between. So we've got Northern California, we've got Oregon, right? We've got the weird place called San Francisco there in the middle. So you can sort of start to think of those and draw the parallels across. So San Francisco's, I don't know, about right there. It's about halfway between these two things, right? And so about halfway between those two is right about there. Middle of Japan. Okay? All right. Continuing on. So that, remember, we were looking at these sort of 4 generalizations as we start our study of Japanese architecture, right? And some of the things that I didn't talk about is the geographic features and the climate features of Japan. Is that Japan is a volcanic island. Okay, it has volcanoes. It sits right on the edge of the Pacific Rim of Fire. We're on the other edge of the Pacific Rim of Fire. All right, we don't have a whole lot of volcanoes going off right now, but you know that up north we have quite a few of them. So,
And Wyoming, right?
no, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens. There's lots and lots of volcanoes, and as you go down to Baja, there's a lot of extinct volcanoes.
Hawaii.
But, well, Hawaii's kind of in the middle of that whole thing. But at any rate, so some of the major things is that it's a forested island. Lots and lots of wood and bamboo, very green. Okay? Earthquakes and major storms, depending on where you are. To the north, they got major cold storms. To the south, they can have major sort of subtropical storms. So there's this abundance of wood and bamboo. And that's one of the things that influenced design and construction in their areas. Have any of you ever traveled down, say, into Baja, California? A couple of you have, right? As you go down to Baja, you find that the further south you go, the less forests there are. And as you look around, with the exception of one little town in the middle of Baja, everything, for the most part, not everything, but almost everything is made out of concrete block and stone. The only exception to that is Santa Rosalia, which was essentially imported by the French. There is an Eiffel church there, by the way, that was displayed next to the Eiffel Tower and shipped all the way to Baja. If any of you have been there, you might have seen that. All right, so let's continue on. We'll kind of move forward to, actually, you know what? I'm almost out of time here. Let me see if I can finish these off.
You're out of time.
Start. Come on.
13.
All right, let go. Stop. Start. I'm going to try to do this in 2 minutes and get through these next 2 slides in a couple minutes. Okay, so now we talk about philosophy and religion, and we've got Shintoism as kind of a core thing. That's one of the ethnic religions of Japan. There is Zen Buddhism that came from China through Korea, and then there's this cultural veneration, this cultural almost worship of nature, of nature being this kind of preeminent thing. Okay, so those are philosophical and religious impacts on the architecture. There are social structure sort of conventions to it, and some of it is this interplay between formality, convention, and then that contrasted with spontaneity. More sort of formal aspects than spontaneity, and then the tension that exists between the 2 extremes. We'll get to this last one, and then finally the influences on Japanese architecture from other cultures are going to include China and Korea. Korea was responsible for sending Buddhism across the channel, and it originally came from China. So I'm going to head and stop this sucker here.